Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Silverstone webinar. My name is Colin Gray. I'm joined this morning by Mark Ison, who's one of our senior consultants, who is going to take us through this session today on what you need to know about Windows 11 and Windows 365. Just before he goes into the detail, if it's okay, I'll quickly kick off with a short introduction to Silverstone for anyone on the session who hasn't worked with us before. So Silverstone's been in business for approximately 35 years now. We're a professional services organization specializing in Microsoft consultancy and support for enterprise and SME markets. On the slide, the three main focus areas. At the top, we've got Microsoft 365, and this contains a number of key components. You've got Office 365, which is your Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., which you're probably familiar with. Second one's Windows 10, Windows 11, where we'll help clients take full advantage of the platform and its latest enterprise and management features, etc. Third component's enterprise mobility and security, and that really contains things like Intune, Azure AD, which are all pretty much essential tools nowadays for deployment, access management, security, etc. Then moving down to the large circle bottom left, we have Power Platform, where we find solutions such as Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. A lot of applications that have really transformed how digital services have been delivered over the last year. Bottom right, we have Microsoft Azure, which is a cloud-based platform, which helps clients essentially manage their on-prem and cloud-based resources in a flexible and resilient way. And then around the edges, we've got smaller circles, which are showing identity management, governance, and security, which are all crucial parts of any technical implementation nowadays. And then last but not least, we've got in the center of the diagram, people and devices, which should really be the focus for any modern day technical change activity. And we very much in Silverstone, we stress that as being one of the most important aspects of any change program. Because if you understand your user base and the tools they need to do their job, it'll help them understand basically why the business change is necessary. And as a result, then it'll sort of drive better adoption and improve the chances of good outcomes. Finally, it's not on the slide, but basically underpinning all that is our professional services around ad hoc and managed support offerings. So that provides technical assistance, proactive support, and additional pair of hands when needed. So that's Silverstone's on the slide. So I'll pass you over to Mark now to begin the overview. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Just so you know, it's my first time living in a slide, so bear with me. I'll have to turn it on and off every so often to make sure I'm not blocking any content, but thought it was worth a go. So welcome. My name is Mark Ison. I'm the practice lead for desktop and devices at Silverstones. Here to talk today about Windows 11 and Windows 365. As far as an agenda goes, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about what these things are, whether you should be using them, what any alternatives might be, how you might look to implement them, and any kind of benefits that sit around the technologies. So before we start talking about Windows 11, I just want to spend a moment talking about Windows 10, where we've come from and where we are kind of right now. So Windows 10 was designed with modern working in mind. That's why it's always referred to as the modern desktop. It was the first operating system from Microsoft to take MDM seriously, by offering configuration that is close or offers very close comparity to that of group policy. Windows 10 was the first OS to be deemed software as a service. This basically meant it was an ever-evolving operating system. New features would appear through annual increments and improvements to the overall software, moving away from the historical single release with service packs and things like that. Now, they had big ambitions for Windows 10. They wanted to release 3 upgrades a year. I think, as we're probably all aware by this point, They didn't do particularly well at that. It was a struggle to keep up with the development pace and getting it rolled out. Organizations found it just too complex, confusing, having 3 a year. So they reduced it down to 2 to simplify things. Now, and as part of this, we've had current branches, long-term service channels, branches for business, semi-annuals, targeted releases. They really did confuse things a bit, but as we've got towards where we are right now, as you'll probably appreciate, things are a little bit more straightforward. Following 1903, targeted deployments were removed, so now there's a single 2 releases a year, and you decide what that rollout is. With Windows 10, they introduced the Insider program, giving you the ability to test latest builds rather than waiting until release day to find out that maybe things don't work quite how you were expecting. Giving you, say, the power to make sure that you are ready to upgrade as and when the builds are released, bearing in mind, obviously, the reduced level of support on each release that's provided. Something I just wanted to quickly clear up, because it is a known misconception, that shortly after Windows 10 was announced, word started spreading that someone had mentioned that it was going to be the last ever release of Windows. Unfortunately, it's not quite true. It was mentioned in a developer conference that it was likely to be the last paid for upgrade, even though it was obviously initially free. And then this was basically taken and people rolled with it and embellished on what was actually said. At no point has Microsoft ever officially stated that Windows 10 was going to be the last desktop release they provided. Windows 10, a move from previous iterations, 7, 8, 8.1, maybe 8.1 with the exception, is that it was a free upgrade from the previous version, something they hadn't done before. This was an exercise of getting bums in seats. They like their numbers of the amount of people using it, and when they went from XP to 7, there were big delays. It took a long time. They weren't getting the numbers they wanted as quickly as they wanted. So by making it free, it just meant that people, even if they were holding on to their old hardware and not buying a new PC, they were still going to get that upgrade. The last thing I just want to throw in there in regards to Windows 10 is that it is going to be supported until October 2025. It's not been made completely clear what that means, as far as, are we going to continue to get 2 build updates a year, as well as the monthly quality updates? For now, we know that there is going to be a 21H2 release of Windows 10, but we've not heard a whole lot more about things moving forward. So that's Windows 10, that was its introduction, and that's where we are with it. So moving on to Windows 11, what's different? What is it? What's changed? Rather than modern working, Microsoft has moved on to hybrid working. It's not all that different from modern working, but considers the fact that devices aren't in their home base on a frequent basis. They are out in the real world. You know, if prior to COVID, if someone spent, even if they were doing some home working, they may be in the office 4 days a week, 1 day from home. There's only 1 day where including a weekend, where it's out in the public and therefore maybe a bit more susceptible to an attack. Now it's the exact opposite. People may only be in the office for 1 day a week and they're home the rest of it. Again, they're connected to their home broadbands. They might be trying to use their own VPNs, whatever else. They have a greater surface attack while they're out in the wild. So Windows 11 was brought in as a bit of a cut-off point, and that's my personal opinion. Windows 10 introduced a lot of security-based features, but they're all optional. You have to go and turn them on. And that's mostly because Windows 10 didn't have the hardware requirements. It was, yes, it would be nice if you had these things, but you don't have to. Now they've changed it. The price of admission into Windows 11 is UEFI, it's secure boot, code integrity, TPM 2.0, all those kind of things, which means that when when you install Windows 11, all of these things can be turned on by default. No extra configuration or anything that needs to go into it. This is their zero trust principles, and something which, if anyone's been paying attention to Ignite, the other little buzz phrase they've been mentioning quite a lot is chip to cloud security. So these things can only be achieved with these hardware requirements in place. And to bolster that, they've dropped 32-bit releases, and Windows 11 is only available as a 64-bit. We see Windows 11 as an evolution of Windows 10 rather than a revolution. It may look and feel different, but the underlying code remains the same. So that means if you have applications that you've got working in Windows 10, maybe you had to spend some time and effort migrating them from Windows 7 to Windows 10. If you did that, you're in a safe place because because Windows 11 has native app compatibility with Windows 10 applications. Now, by no means are Microsoft going to provide any kind of genuine guarantee around that. They say this is what they tell us, but as a backup, they have Microsoft's App Assure program. For anyone who's not heard of that before, it was something they introduced as part of the migration from 7 to 10. That if you had an application, a custom-built line of business application that worked on Windows 7 and didn't work on Windows 10, Microsoft would provide you resources to assist in getting that application working. And they've actually had a 99.6% success rate in migrating those apps from legacy operating systems to 10. Same, if it worked in 10, but you're having difficulties in 11, App Assure will help you get that application ready and working in Windows 11. Windows 10 was a free upgrade from 7, but only for a limited time. At the moment, it's understood that Windows 11 will be a free upgrade from anyone who has a Windows 8 license onward. No time limits have been advertised. People have tested various kind of in-place upgrades and installations, and people have found that anything prior to 8 doesn't seem to quite fly, but Windows 8 onwards, your Windows 8 license key will also activate a Windows 11 installation. And then probably one of the biggest benefits from an organizational standpoint is the servicing side of things. So we're not 3 releases, we're not 2 releases, we're a single release a year. Greatly simplifying your ability to roll out that software in a suitable time frame and giving you ample time of testing to be able to do it. Microsoft do provide an additional resource known as TestBase, which I think I mentioned in a moment, which also allows you to provide to complete testing on dedicated environments running specific versions of Office 365 and Windows 11 or 10, older versions, newer versions, insider preview versions, all sorts. All there to help you with your adoption of the new operating system. So the questions that we're getting now is, so what now? So we know what Windows 10 is. We've got a bit of an idea of what Windows 11 is and how it's going to look. What's next? So should you upgrade? Now, Microsoft have already begun rolling out the upgrade to eligible hardware. As I mentioned before, Windows 10 is supported until 2025, so there's no rush. It's not automatically just going to happen. In your organization anyway, at home, yes, you may just automatically be upgraded to Windows 11, but in the enterprise, you will not. You need to tell your machines to update to Windows 11. And if you bear with me, I will just share my overall screen. Let me, we'll jump over into a management policy. So for Windows 11, if you are using Intune to manage your devices, the easiest way to start rolling out Windows 11 is to use the feature updates section within devices in Endpoint Manager. Now within here, as you can see, this is how you control what version of Windows your users are going to have. When we create a profile, just give it a demo name, and then we choose what update you want to deploy. So if you did not create this feature update deployment and you left everything as it is, your machines that are managed by Intune will continue to receive Windows 10. They will not upgrade unless you go and create this feature update deployment. And as you can see, we can target specific versions of Windows 10 and Windows 11. So if I create that and assign it to a group, when I add a machine into the group, it will then become eligible for Windows 11 and then perform its upgrade. Okay, probably bear with me just a second. Right. So how can you prepare for Windows 11? So the first thing to start with, as it's been the biggest point of contention, is around the hardware compatibility. So how do you know if your hardware is compatible? Well, first off, Microsoft will provide a set of scripts which you can deploy out to your estate, which will then report back to you as to whether the device is compatible. Now, there is a much easier way of doing it, and again, Intune is our friend in regards to this. So what I'm going to just do is jump over to find the right one. It's not that one. Apologies for this. Apologies for this. There we go. Right, so Endpoint Analytics within Intune will give you the answers as to whether your devices are ready for Windows 11 or not. As long as you've got the monitoring solution turned on, we're able to go into the Work from Anywhere report. And within here, we can go to Windows, and it will show us all of the devices that we've got, what state they're in, and whether they are ready for Windows 11 or not. And if they're not ready, it will give us the reasons as to why. So we can see we've got some that are upgraded, there are still some that are unknown, and we've got a long list of not capable devices, say for a number of reasons. TPM not being 2.0, system firmware not being up to date or supporting latest UEFIs, CPU not being supportable, and there's another one which I haven't quite understood what it means yet, which is CPU bitness, which my assumption is that it's a 32-bit machine rather than a 64-bit. So again, one of the reasons as to why you're not able to upgrade to it. So hardware compatibility, we've got that answered from a preparation standpoint. It may be that you're not ready for Windows 11 until you go through a hardware refresh. But again, Microsoft have effectively given you 4 years notice as to when you need to be off Windows 10. I know they gave quite a bit of notice from 7 to 10. They've given you even more this time. Within your environment, start using insider previews. They've been massively helpful to organizations during the Windows 10 years, and they will continue to be of use during the Windows 11 years and moving forward. And that includes creating pilot groups, which don't necessarily have to be on the insider builds. Now that Windows 11 is generally available, you can use the pilot. You can use pilot groups to start testing on eligible hardware. Mentioned before, additional services that Microsoft provide, App Assure service, you will understand what your application requirements are following testing within the insider previews and pilot builds. And also this new service called TestBase, which, as I mentioned, it allows you to pick specific versions of Windows operating systems and Microsoft 365 applications in combination to fully test your applications for compatibility and functionality reasons. And the last one really, which falls outside of any kind of technology side of things, is the usability. Windows 11 is not all that different from 10 from a code side of things, from a technical standpoint, but from a usability it is. And when we move on to the Windows 365 things, we'll be able to look at the Windows 11 desktop and everything that's good and everything there. But as anyone who might have seen some screenshots, simple things like the start menu moving to the middle, the settings app slightly changed, and a number of things, visual changes. If you right-click icons and right-click files to copy and paste them, you don't have the traditional copy-paste written options. You've got icons. Users may not be used to that, and they may not be used to seeing that. So prepare any kind of user adoption pieces and user education that might be required with it. I'm sure the slide deck will go out afterwards, but there are additional resources that you can use to understand what's happening and what's going on. Windows 11 requirements, security book, and around TestBase as well. So that's it for Windows 11 for the moment, and we'll move on to Windows 365. So the overall question of what is Windows 365? In simple terms, it's a PC in the cloud. It's always on, always available, accessible from any device with any and any browser. Microsoft provide two levels of service for Windows 365. They have business and they have enterprise. Business is for a maximum of up to 300 machines or 300 user organization, and is limited to management through Endpoint Manager only, with an additional license for that management solution. Whereas enterprise there's no cap on the amount of machines that you can have as part of that. The main difference is that business includes a Windows license, but only a Windows license. You need your 365 licensing on top for the Office applications and everything else. Enterprise, you get no licenses with it. It requires that your users have subscription licenses for Windows 10 or Windows 11, and obviously all the extra management, Azure AD, P1, your EMS suites, your Microsoft 365s, E3s, E5s, whatever it may be. It relies on you licensing everything else on top of it. However, Enterprise at the moment does provide hybrid Azure AD join. In fact, it only provides hybrid Azure AD join. If you were going to do native Azure, that's only capable in business at the moment, but that's not expected to be forever or for too long. And Enterprise is able to take advantage of any other management solution that you may have. So, for example, if you're using Configuration Manager and it's in co-management with Intune, you can carry on doing that. What that means from an enterprise standpoint is that if you have a set of, whether it's MDM policies, group policies, you have a management framework in place, these cloud PCs will be able to take advantage of that and be operated and managed in exactly the same way as your physical hardware would be. The service is automatic, it's self-service in its provisioning. It is as straightforward as assigning a license to a user, and then it will start going to provision that service. If you are on the business level, users also have the ability to do things like resize their machine to a larger size if they're having issues with performance. Obviously, that does rely on a license being available for that upgraded hardware. But self-service across the board include things like renaming the PC, restarting it. So if they are having problems, obviously there's no big button that they can press, but they're able to do it from their own access console. Windows 365, and in Microsoft's words, provides the lowest total cost of ownership for a Windows desktop. Now, that can be difficult to kind of quite comprehend, because if you look at in simple terms, if I go and buy a £1,000 laptop and my hardware refresh period is 3 to 5 years, how does that £1,000 laptop compare to a subscription cost of anywhere between 25 up to, I think, as high as £60 a month for a machine, depending obviously what hardware you're going for? And it's a case of taking a step back and looking at it from a wider view. You're not just buying a physical piece of hardware. Once you've bought it, if it's going to last 5 years, you need to support it for 5 years. That will be extended warranties, that will be support costs for help desk staff, for any blue screen issues, whether it's hardware replacements or just general issues with the operating system. It needs rebuilding. That is all your IT's job to do. Microsoft manage the Windows 365 desktop. So any issues that you experience with it, you raise a call with Microsoft and it's their problem to fix it. So I will just quickly jump into the Windows 365 configuration. Very straightforward. It's accessible within the Endpoint Manager portal. Going into Windows 365, there are only 1, 2, 3 elements that need to be configured for Windows 365 to work, and they're all relatively straightforward. You need an on-premises network connection first of all. So this is assuming that you have an Azure subscription and you have a site-to-site VPN set up, and that you have networking configured that has access to that internal network and a domain controller. As part of that network connection, you Then it runs through a series of tests, making sure that it can resolve everything, but you don't do that. You're just saying, this is the network that I want to use, the VNet that I want to use, and away it goes. Creates that for you. You then need to provide a provisioning profile. That's, again, fairly straightforward. With this, if anyone's worked with Autopilot, you've had to create a domain join profile. That's effectively what this provisioning profile is. You're saying whereabouts it's going to be joining you say where it's going to join the network, what image is it going to use. What this allows you to do is have multiple setups, multiple network connections, on-premise network connections, and multiple provisioning profiles, so that if you had a finance user and then a HR user, you would assign the HR user their provisioning policy, and they might get a custom image which includes their finance apps, and your HR person will get an image with their HR applications, just as an example. It's not one thing that you then have to go and do all the configuration for afterwards. Now, I mentioned custom images. Enterprise currently supports custom images. Business currently does not. It is assumed that they will have parity across the board in the coming months, but they're not essential. You can use gallery images. The only other bit that's required is user settings, and I'll be honest, there is a single user setting, which is, are you going to enable a local admin? Yes or no. Once you have those in place, it is as straightforward as going into the user and assigning them a license. As soon as you assign them a license, you will see that it will automatically start provisioning. So any licenses that you've got, your machines will be listed here, and whether it's been provisioned or not, this will basically go and start that process. Now, Microsoft's documentation says that it takes between 20 to 25 minutes to provision a machine. My experience personally was more 45 minutes to an hour for that device to become available using the gallery image. But once I logged onto it, everything comes through. And what that looks like is you have a Windows 365 portal. That's what the user would access. And within here, we've got our number of access options and self-service tasks. So as you can see from here, I can restart, I can rename, troubleshoot if there are any issues, and collect some system information. As far as an access standpoint, I can log into the browser on any operating system. I can then, as long as it is a supported client, get the official Microsoft Remote Desktop app. It provides slightly better connectivity between the two, but not a major difference between the browser experience and that application experience. A Linux client is expected in the very near future. But I'm a user. I've gone to a internet cafe, wherever it is, logged into the 365 portal, and I click on Open in Browser. Again, anyone who's used virtual desktop will see that this link here is very similar. And I will say that if you are using virtual desktop and you're using 365, if you log into the virtual desktop portal, you will have access to the Windows 365 desktop at the same time. So, as you can see, I've now logged onto my desktop. It's exactly where I left it before. I've got my applications open that I was using before. Things are left behind a little bit. Got the presentation that we're going through now. That's up there as well. And the one demo that Microsoft seemed to quite enjoy doing, so I'll do it as well, which is performing a speed test, because obviously I'm currently connected to here and I've limited with my internet connection to probably a gig because I'm in an office. When I am using my Microsoft desktop and I do a speed test, we are getting Microsoft's Azure data center speeds. We're not getting, there's nothing coming from here. Okay, we've got that upload on there. So I'll just leave that in the background. So while we're here, I will just take a quick moment just to point out some of the things within Windows 11. Obviously, the major one is that change of the start menu over to here, and then the overall view of the start menu. Windows 10 made quite a lot of effort to make this user-friendly, make it customizable, and Windows 11 has taken a bit of a step back on that. It is customizable as far as you can pin things and you can move things around, and as an organization, you can predefine a layout and deploy that out to your devices. But things like folders, groups, bits like that, unfortunately, they've done away with them. Whether they'll see a reintroduction or not, we'll wait to be seen. But we've got our favorite apps, we've got our pinned apps. It's relying on users being a little bit more, I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this application, so I'm going to just start searching for it. Something else which people have picked up on is, when you are looking for your usual options for your Windows, well, now Windows Terminal, which I have to say, my personal opinion is probably one of my favorite ones. For anyone that hasn't seen it, the Windows Terminal is great. Now I can have tabbed PowerShell, but I can also have tabbed Command Prompt and PowerShell next to each other and have as many as I want. And there's also the ability to add your own custom terminals in here. So if you're a Linux user with Bash and what have you, you can add those in as well. As I was mentioning, within here, we're used to right-clicking our kind of taskbar and getting options like Task Manager and various other things. You need to do that on the Start menu now. If you do it anywhere else, you get your taskbar settings. But what you do get in the taskbar settings is the ability to move it. So if you don't like it in the center, you can move it back over to the left. Okay, have it how you prefer it, if your users are used to having it that way. The other bit that I mentioned around Windows 10 from a usability standpoint is, historically I would go in and I'd want to copy and paste something, and I would right click and select the copy button. So I don't have a copy button anymore. Instead, it's this icon, which if you're in the know, great. You can do that and you can paste it. However, again, paste button's not there, but we do have it there. We can go to show more options, and then we get our traditional list that we're used to. Okay, so that's the Windows 365 desktop, and that is your Windows 11. Just as a quick, here's what the desktop looks like, and a couple of little bits. So the big questions that are coming out of the introduction of Windows 365 is, how does it differ from virtual desktop? So they use the exact same core framework in the background. As you saw, they are using the same portal for access. They're using the same connection solutions, effectively getting rid of all the previous things that you needed with remote desktop, your gateways, connection brokers, and everything else. Now, virtual desktop is the only solution that provides Windows 10 multi-session. Provides remote apps, session desktops, personal desktop configurations. It's a flexible infrastructure, but it is consumption-based pricing. So when I say that virtual desktop can provide the same as Windows 365, I really mean it, because virtual desktop has personal desktops, and that personal desktop is a one-to-one ratio. When someone logs in, they're assigned that desktop. Every time they log in, they will access that desktop. If you choose to leave that machine on 24/7, whenever they reconnect, same as what I've just experienced with Windows 365, everything will be how it was when I left it. The major difference, because it is consumption-based, if you leave that on 24/7, you are paying for the cost of it running 24/7. However, if it is a worker that only works 9 to 5, it doesn't need to be on, for almost 3/4 of the day. It doesn't need to be on over weekends. So with virtual desktop, you can use scaling scripts to power on and power off machines as and when you choose, or you can just have them powered off when you choose, and then use the solution which is power on at connect, where the next time a user goes and logs into that machine, it will turn it on for them. It means a little bit of a delay in the connection, but it goes and turns the machine on and then initiates it onto it. But the drawback to that is that it requires a fair bit of configuration. Just to demonstrate that, when I go into doing this to me again. There you go. So when I go into the Azure portal and virtual desktop, in comparison to what we saw in the Windows 365 configuration, where there's just those 2-3 simple policies to create, first of all, you need to start off with creating a resource group. Then you need to create a host pool. Then you need to have application groups. Then you need to have workspaces. Then you need to scale it. There's a lot of configuration and potentially relies on you having someone within your organization who is who understands VDI and how that works. When new machines need to go out, you need to go to the host pool and deploy additional machines to that host pool. So yes, you can be much cleverer with the cost, but at the expense of having to put a bit more thought into how it is set up and how it is configured. Whereas with Windows 365, it's dedicated, it is always on. If it's on for only 5 minutes a week, you pay the same price as if it's on 24/7. Say Microsoft is supporting that end-to-end service. So any kind of configuration issues, anything like that, Microsoft will be able to support that for you. The drawback is that you are fixed on your machine sizes. We all know that Azure provides hundreds upon different VMs, sizes, configurations for different types of workloads and different worker types. And Virtual Desktop can use any of them. Windows 365, you can't. You're set by these predetermined levels of machine capability and resource, but you have that unlimited. I think the only limit that they do impose, I think on the business version, there is, depending on the machine size that you have, they've implemented a restriction on upload. It's almost like a fair use policy, where if you upload more than 8 gig within or 10 gig within a set period of time, they will start to throttle it, as opposed to giving you that full resource of the network. Now there are some bits which cross over between Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, which we've kind of covered quite a few of them already. The availability of that desktop anywhere, or it goes across both of the two. Compatibility with Teams. The key difference with that is that Virtual Desktop, if you want to use Teams, it is recommended that you install some additional components which provide acceleration and redirection technology for Teams. The way that they've configured Teams through Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 is that the majority of the actual processing power is done on your end machine. So it's just doing some basic streaming, and then your local machine is actually doing all the rendering to be able to provide a better quality of service. On a Windows 365 desktop, when you deploy it, it comes with all of those optimizations already embedded in the operating system. Endpoint Manager is a management solution across the board. It can manage your virtual desktop machines and Windows 365. There is the only caveat around that is that MDM policies on virtual desktop are not quite as limited as they were, but they don't accept the traditional templates that people may have used to create their Intune policies. So anyone who's been in Intune recently will notice that there is a preview policy called settings catalog. Virtual Desktop can basically only accept settings from that settings catalog. Anything outside of that, they're not supported. Okay, that's to do with the way that it being a shared desktop, as it were, and a lot of the policies that Intune uses are based around the user. So it's difficult for it to be able to implement 2 different policy types on a user when multiple people are logged into it. And then that ability to use custom images. Virtual Desktop can use custom images, Windows 365 can. Again, there's just various steps that you need to take to make sure that your image is ready for an Azure deployment, but those requirements haven't changed since Azure started accepting custom images for server operating systems. The simplest way to do that is create your custom image on an Azure machine to begin with, and then you know that it's got all the extra bits that you might need in it. So as far as which solution you should use, should I use Virtual Desktop, should I use Windows 365? The key question is, what level of service do your users require? Are they a call center worker, a road worker, light touch? Are they only using a single application? In those scenarios, virtual desktop is probably what you're going to be looking for. They're infrequently using the machines. There's nothing overly intensive that they're doing. They might only be using Office and Teams, in which case Azure Virtual Desktop would suit that need, whether that's through a session desktop or if it's through remote applications. So if they don't require a full desktop, if all they're doing is using one application, publish it as a remote app and give them access just to that, reducing the surface area in which they could potentially impose an attack because they can't get to the actual underlying operating system. I kind of touched on it briefly earlier. Why not just continue to buy your hardware? And it comes back to what I mentioned before. This total cost of ownership and what you're looking at is what you're looking at. Are you going to put all your eggs into that basket of buying hardware and supporting it for the next 4 to 5 years? Or if Microsoft in future release, let's say although it's unlikely, let's say that they were to release Windows 12 in a few years' time. You've just bought hardware specific for 11, and then 12 comes out and they introduce new hardware requirements, because let's face it, technology is moving incredibly quickly these days. That means that you're in a position where your hardware is out of date again and you're going to have to upgrade it. If you're using the Windows 365 and they introduce a new hardware requirement, Microsoft will introduce that hardware requirement into that Windows 365 desktop. The last one, which is very much an internal process question, which is how users access it. It's all good and well saying, right, we're not going to give you a physical machine anymore. We're going to give you a cloud PC. And the first question as a user, well, how do I get to it? And as an IT, you would say, well, you would use your machine at home and log on to the portal. What if the user doesn't have a machine? Yes, they may have iPads, they may have phones, things like that. But is it responsible to expect a user to spend however many hours a day on an iPad using a full Windows desktop? So yes, it's a bit of a grey area, bit of an off question. But yes, is it going to be the company's responsibility to give them an allowance to go and buy a bit of hardware? If you do that, do you then still have to support that piece of hardware that's being used to access the hardware that you're trying not to support anymore? Gets a little bit confusing, but it's internal process, and again, something which moving on over the years will become a little bit more straightforward and become hopefully a bit more obvious as to what that answer is, because I don't really know what the answer to that one is right now either. It's all down to the business. The reality of it is, are you looking for something? Are you an organization that says, right, when we are working out our budgets, how much am I going to need per user for the next year? With Windows 365, you've got that answer. It is, let's say, £80 per month for a machine and a full licensing suite. Everything that user is going to need from an IT standpoint, it's £80 per user per month. You can then see how many users you've got, what your expectation is for increased in staffing, and you can say, this is the maximum it's going to cost me. Some organizations, the larger ones, are very happy to work on those lines, but smaller ones, maybe not quite so much. They would rather cut costs where they can. They don't have to pay £80 per person. They can pay less than that, then great. But what that means from a budgetary standpoint is that you could say, right, well, I could need 100,000 a year, but I could also only need 80,000 if I'm clever with it. Which budget are you asking for, 80 or 100? But in that case, you could always use it where I'll say 100, and if I can save money on those machines and save 10, 15 grand, that's 10, 15 grand that you've got then to use on another project and start looking to improve something else. So costing being one of those questions. Simplicity over flexibility. Again, this comes down to IT, the knowledge of your staff. Are they VDI experts? In which case, flexibility and Azure Virtual Desktop would be right in their wheelhouse. or simplicity if you're just looking, if you've just got a standard kind of help desk support level there, and you're potentially using a third party for the additional higher levels, then you may choose to go with Windows 365 outside of the initial setup. After that, as I mentioned, it's as simple as assigning a license, and away that goes. So to summarize everything that we've kind of everything that I've been over, hybrid working, it's here to stay. A couple of stats there that I thought were quite important from Ignite that I've put on there, that ultimately, although things are, touch wood, going back to normal, more people are going into the offices. Anyone who's been driving around recently, I've noticed over since the summer holidays, feels incredibly busy out there on the roads, which means that people are going out and about. They are going to offices more frequently than they were at the beginning of the year. So that side is picking up, but the fact that now majority of organizations have implemented home working solutions and made it permanent, they are going to be out of the office, which means that organizations may look to reducing their footprint for offices and things like that, which will then limit the amount of people that can go in, and it's just going to be a steady flow like that. In regards to Windows 11, it's not for everyone right now. That's understood purely from a hardware standpoint, that not everyone has adequate hardware to support Windows 11, so do not worry about it. That's not to say that you can't start using it. Start evaluating it, see if you're ready for it. Get testing, try it, get some user feedback on what they do like, what they don't like, what bits are confusing them, so that you can preempt a full rollout with assisted documentation, training, educating them on. These are the frequently asked questions within our test group, and giving them the answers before they become a bigger issue. And then in regards to Windows Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, it's evaluating your scenarios. What access do your users need? Do they require a dedicated desktop? Do they require it only a couple of days a week? Do they only require a single application? Depending where it is, depends on which one you go for. But one solution doesn't have to fit all of your fit all your scenarios. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can have both. You can have this the virtual desktop solution providing its services for your lighter touch workers, and Windows 365 for your larger power users. Ultimately, doing nothing right now isn't really an option. It is, but you shouldn't. Start looking at all of these things, especially Windows 11, trying it, testing it, and looking at modern ways of providing these resources, applications to your users, because all of these things will greatly simplify your IT requirements, your IT support levels, because everything's just going to be running as a service. It's one of the beauties of software as a service, that a lot of it is taken off your hands. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass over to Colin to let me know if any questions have come up during the session.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'm glad you covered the differences between virtual desktop and Windows 365, because that was going to be one of my questions before we actually started this session. Been a few questions. One question that someone's asked is can Windows 11 be installed on unsupported hardware?
So technically, yes. If you downloaded the ISO and ran the installation on an unsupported piece of hardware, my understanding is that it will install. Obviously, you might just experience problems, blue screens, all sorts of issues. There are also, the main way of obtaining Windows 11 is through an in-place upgrade, through Windows Update. But however, that does have multiple checks in to make sure that your CPU is supported and various other bits. There are hacks out there, and I believe Microsoft have even provided some that you can do to modify the registry, which basically tells it please don't check the CPU. You're saying, I understand that my CPU is not officially supported, but I'm happy with that risk. So you make this change, and then when you check for updates, it will then consider you as being eligible to receive it. So yes, but obviously not recommended unless it is purely from for testing purposes.
Good, thank you for that. Got another, because you mentioned about there's not one fit for everything. It's a bit of you could have a bit of a mix and match approach. So is there a minimum number of Windows 365 licenses that you can buy?
No, there is no minimum buy for Windows 365 or for virtual desktop. It's what you need it for. You go and buy the licenses, and then it becomes available to one license or as many as you want.
Okay, and I think you probably already covered this one, but can a Windows 365 machine be shared between users, or is it one-to-one?
No, it is purely one-to-one. Yes, you could, again, theoretically have a shared account that multiple people have the username and password for and log into it. But we would never recommend that. That would be a very large security threat because you're sharing passwords, and not to forget that would technically be breaking Microsoft license agreement. So again, you could end up with getting a rap for that as well.
Okay, there's just one other one, which is what are the licensing differences between virtual desktop and Windows 365?
Okay, so good question. So as I mentioned, Windows 365 Business, you buy the license for the hardware, and as part of that, it includes the Windows license. Any additional services that you need on top of that, Azure AD Premium for MFA and password reset, EMS for Intune management, and everything else, Microsoft 365 applications, you need to obtain those licenses separately. From a virtual if you are using the enterprise version, you need to have licenses for everything that comes as part of it. From a virtual desktop standpoint, if you have at the moment Windows 10 or /11 subscription licenses, anyone who's got one of those assigned to them can access a virtual desktop session or remote app or personal device without any additional licensing being required. If you don't have Windows subscription licenses, then you can purchase VDA licenses at a reduced cost, which allows users to access that desktop fully licensed. And then again, any additional applications on top of that will also require that license, the licenses for what they might be.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. If there's nothing else that anyone wants to ask, just remains to say thanks for attending. Hopefully you found something out of this session that was useful for you. Can I just ask that you take sort of 30 seconds to just complete the survey in the chat, and please keep an eye on our website. We're just putting together the program for 2022 at the moment, so events will be posted there quite soon for the coming year. So other than that, thanks for taking the time to attend, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay.
Thank you very much.